Top 10 times Drive Suess Was Controversial. Whether his books inspired you to read or try green eggs, Dr. Seuss has become a household name for generations. Although well known to many as the author of their childhood, Theodore Geisel was much more than the man behind the rhyme. Throughout his life, he created content that was entertaining and odd, but occasionally controversial and, at times, racist. Many of his published works drew on his own lived experiences, both positive and negative. 10. Theodore Geisel and his first wife. Dr. Seuss, known to his family and friends as Ted, married his first wife Helen Palmer in 1927. Helen was a talented children's author in her own right, penning highly acclaimed stories, in addition to expanding on Seuss's own work. She would also go on to found Beginner's Books, a subset of Random House Publishing dedicated to books for young readers. Beginner's Books became the largest children's publishing company in America. You may be wondering how his relationship with someone so talented and powerful in her own right would be controversial. Well, Helen fell ill with Guillain-Barré syndrome and subsequently became paralyzed as a result of her illness. After 13 years of battling various health problems, Palmer died by suicide on October 23, 1967. Just before her death, she left a note detailing how her difficult relationship with Seuss was a main contributing factor in her death. 9. Dr. Seuss Hooks, a housewife. While working as a nurse in Massachusetts, Audrey met the Seuss. It wasn't long before she and Ted grew close, fueling rumors about a torrid affair between the two. These rumors were seemingly proved true when in Helen's suicide note she pointed to their affair as a reason for her deep depression. Immediately following her friend's death, Audrey filed for divorce from her then-husband. The two married less than a year after Helen's death. Not only did Ted's indiscretion contribute to his first wife's death, but to the demise of his second wife's relationship with her children. 8. The minstrel show Disgrace. Many of his later works have racist tones and presentations. But his earliest work was no different. In fact, it was even more troublesome. In his high school years, Ted was known to not only have written and directed but also to have starred in a minstrel show, complete with blackface. A minstrel show in name alone may sound like a light-hearted comedy meant to bring joy to families of all kinds. But historically it's quite the opposite. 7. Cat in the Hat has a racist face. It's eye-opening to learn exactly where Dr. Seuss took inspiration from for his famous illustrations of the cat, in The Cat in the Hat. A minstrel was most often a white man, who painted his face with makeup to mock and degrade the black community. You can see how the white interior of the cat in the hat's face and body, surrounded by the black exterior fur and topped by an exaggerated bow tie and top hat, are reminiscent of the costuming of a minstrel actor. 6. Department store publications. In 1929, Dr. Seuss was an active contributor to judge a successful conservative newspaper of the time. In a particularly shocking illustration, he features white men in what seems to be a department store. Instead of shopping for everyday household items, these men are looking at nonsensical products that are purposefully designed to make the buyer's life difficult. This includes a haystack that hides a needle and one man catching gnats to go with a healing salve. As the reader comes to the bottom panel of the illustration, you begin to see how overt the portrayed racism truly is. There's no hiding it. 5. Prejudice against Japanese Americans. It's true, Dr. Seuss attempted to help support the United States through World War II by selling war bonds and by drawing political cartoons. But in many ways, he fell flat. Perpetuating the notion that Japanese Americans belonged in internment camps was not only counterintuitive but morally objectionable. While he tried to critique the United States' lack of response to the genocide of children in Europe, he racialized his depictions of the Japanese. In one famous cartoon, Japanese people are seen lining up for miles for the chance to buy bombs, and he insinuates that they're lying in wait for orders from the Japanese army. In another, you see cats jumping a fence into an internment camp, furthering negative stereotypes about Japanese Americans. 4. You don't want to know what's on Mulberry Street. One of the books included in the 2021 cancel of Dr. Suess's books is Into Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street. The Swiss estate decided to pull 6 books because of the blatant racist depictions through their illustrations. Mulberry Street featured an illustration of an Asian man in a pointed cap, slanted lines for eyes, and featured him holding a bowl of rice with chopsticks. 3. If Swiss ran the zoo, it'd be hard to compete. In his 1950 children's book If I Ran the Zoo, Swiss follows a young boy as he travels the world in an elaborate fantasy about filling his own zoo. It seems relatively harmless for a young boy to daydream about adventures in far-off lands. But the illustrations that accompany the story follow a more sinister line of thought. The story depicts this young boy traveling to capture increasingly exotic creatures, steal them away from their homes and hold them in captivity to be gawked at by strangers. Not only would this concept alone be very supportive of colonization ideology, but the depictions of the people in these lands are also questionable at best. 2. The real trash in Ms. Liggetts' pool. Apparently the little boy from Into Think I Saw It on Mulberry Street didn't cause enough havoc. He returned from Ms. Liggetts' pool. Here the young boy sits by a pond, hopeful of catching a fish. When an adult comes by attempting to crush the boy's hopes and dreams, telling him the pool is full of trash, he imagines a better outcome. Again, one would not typically assume that a young boy dreaming of a big fish on his line would be controversial in any way, but Dr. Suess is here to prove you wrong. This time Suess moved past his typical portrayal of Black and Japanese Americans. He set his sights a little farther north. Here he illustrates fish in thick fur hooded jackets, purporting that these fish would swim from the North Pole down to this pool for the sole purpose of planting itself perfectly to be caught by this young boy's line. Not only did he yet again portray a native culture in an overdone cartoonish way, relying only on stereotypes of the time, but he referred to this fish as Eskimo. 1. Cancellations cause sales to skyrocket. Well duh. When the announcement from the Dr. Suess estate came on March 2, 2021, that they would cease printing 6 of his books, people went nuts. Many groups lashed out for perpetuating cancel culture, or the idea of scrapping anything to avoid hurting someone's feelings, regardless of how harmless it may be. While those in support rallied around the estate's decision to pull the books, thrilled that children might be shielded from potentially offensive material. In the following weeks, demand for Swiss material skyrocketed. The New York Times bestseller list was topped by Dr. Suess's books, although none were the stories that had been removed from publication. Because of the sudden loss of supply, and the sharp uptick in demand, the prices on the cancelled books skyrocketed.